Hello, everyone. As you know, my name is Darryl Dunnington. I will be leading the session this evening, which is November 20, 6 p.m. session. So we had our morning session. We talked about where we're going to get us ready for the SAE certification. Our focus is on the rule, it being that granular core of PEGA that actually gets executed. This low code platform translates our design into Java and it executes it. So the rules are the component that gets translated and becomes executable code. So let's go ahead and have a big little discussion here about what we covered in our last session. You can always go out to the recording folder, find what we did for this morning, our 10 a.m. session. Inside of that, you will find the meeting notes in English and Spanish. You have the document, which is a consolidation, a comprehensive summary of what we covered in that hour and a half this morning, along with the podcast. Podcast is in English and in Spanish. And we have also the mind maps. Those are very helpful. I don't know if you guys ever look at those, but take a look at them, download them. You can um, enlarge them so that, or increase the size so you can see if you're trying to learn something from a logical perspective, that is the place to go. Um, you can go to your channel. To your channel, we have a YouTube channel that's out there. Here's the latest version. Right now, there are 26 videos from all of the sessions that we've had so far. Go back and listen to those if you like, and you should have received a WebEx recording. Certificate of Achievement, you should be looking for that in your email. This is the latter part of a week. Hopefully it shows up soon. If it doesn't show up by Monday, we'll have to take steps, but I wanted to check in with you guys. Anyone receive their certificate of achievement in their email? Anyone? Give me a thumbs up if you did. Okay, so I think we're still looking for that. Expect that to come. It will definitely be on the way. And if you have not uploaded your score from your BAE certification results, please do that. Put it in the appropriate folder that's up there, and you can, yeah. So the folder is 1113. So that's where you want to put that information. I remind you each class period the importance of completing all of your essays so that you can be ready and approved to sit for the SAE certification. Those essays have important certification information for SAE. That's why you guys did so well for BAE. I gave you more than what you needed. I gave you some understanding about the depth of the product and technology for SAE. So finish those up as soon as possible. So for today's session, we'll talk about creating a rule again. That is the essence of PEGA technology. Everything is a rule. Everything emanates out of a rule. We talked about the 4 steps of utilizing a rule. First is to identify the rule type out of the 250-ish or 200 or more rules that we have, identifying which one will do the job for you. At that point, you want to create a new or an instance of that blueprint. And you do that by right-clicking, creating new off of the rule type. It creates a new instance for you. That new instance is there, allows you to put in a label or a name and a class that it is applied to, along with a rule set where it will be stored for deployment. And a rule set will have the versions, the major, the version, major, and minor. You save that rule, and now that rule is saved in a class. That class is associated with a class hierarchy. It's either at the org level or the division level or the application implementation framework level, or, well, it could be in the PEGA layer, but that would be one that's already created there. You'd never save it there. So you have that. And I showed you how to go to the studio. The studio already knows context. The context is always the case type, which is the class that it is implemented as. So when you go and create a twin rule and you're on the case designer and you click on that, that particular rule, it knows which rule type to go and get. It knows which rules form to open for you, and it gives you the right tab of information that you then can configure it, and when you save it, it is implemented into the workflow at that particular location. Now, if you create it manually, then it can be implemented anywhere within your workflow or anywhere within your application. So those are the main ways of creating a rule. So what I'll do today is I will cover low code apps builder extended. This morning I covered low code apps builder, went through all of the required modules for you and giving you an idea of what you need to do so that you can get this mission exercise and mission test enabled and get your second digital badge. Tonight, I'll cover this section. It's very brief. It's not much that you have to learn. Matter of fact, I went over it before this class, and there's only 5 sections, 5 modules, and most of the modules only have one topic in it. Took me all of 5 minutes to go through each one of those and get it done so you can enable this particular extended module and complete the exercise in the mission test to get your third badge. So we're going to focus on the rule. Right after I cover that, this is our 7:30 session. Monday we'll meet again at 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Always congratulate you guys on your outstanding achievement for the business architect certification. As a group, you scored well above the not only the national average, but the global average. First time doing it. Very proud of you. You have acquired your business architect 24.2 badge along with the 24.3 23.1 certification, which makes you current and certified at the 24.2 level. So these are the other 3 digital badges that you should be working toward if you have not already completed those. And at the end of everything, you'll do the system architect digital badge. So that will be your 5 badges. And we'll use the last 2 weeks to go through the AWS training to get your 4 certificates. Those are important. All right, so that's all I have here. I will close this out and we will get started. All right, so I will lecture my lecture material. This is my lecture material, PEGA rules. I'm on page 80 of 88. So if you're looking for this particular PDF document, it is in the study guide. In the study guide, you'll see there is a business and technical solution skill guide. That's the source that I'll do my lecture from. I have my exercise system that I am bringing up. Let's see if I can bring that up right quickly. Bring up the exercise system, follow along with me. It helps the night go by faster. Definitely. Instead of you just listening to me, try to mimic and do what I'm doing. Also, while that's coming up, you also want to follow me. I am in the low code apps builder extended, the module. And you'll see that this is the low code apps builder that we've already talked about. and I'll scroll all the way down to the first required module. I'll stop there. Let me go back to my environment, see if it's up. And my environment is up where it was this morning, where we left off. So we are good to go, and we are ready to get started with the lecture. All right, so let me roll the there we go. So let me put this out the way. Get it to the screen. I can go back and forth between the two. Let me put that up there, situate it. All right, that's just good enough. All right, so this morning we talked about the rule being the basic building block. It's the instruction. It is the step in that case life cycle that you're using a shape if you go to the flow rule to create it. And we talked about briefly where all of those rule types are within these 16 categories. You add them all up when you expand it. You add them all up, it's a little over 200. I believe it's about 209 of the rule types that are there. Now, the rules give you the capability to build an application. That's all you need. PEGA does not know any other language other than a rule. That rule is a interface for it in the outside world or any of the internal elements or artifacts that it is utilizing. So for instance, if it needs to interface with a database, then guess what? We have to have a database rule. So, for example, I would have to go and look in, let's see, it's probably in sysadmin. Yes, and here's a database rule type. So if I wanted to create a connection with an external database, DB2, SQL Server, Oracle, I would have to come to the database rule type and create a database. And I'd do the same way. I'd say create. It brings up a rules form, allows me to enter in that information. If I wanted to create a database table so that PEGA could recognize it, I'd have to create a rule instance of that. And that process is create, doing the create, comes up with a tab. In the tab, it gives me my configurable information that I can then enter in. I save it, and then I implement it in a given place. So this is fairly simple. Doesn't have multiple tabs, just has a couple of fields that you'd fill out if I want to create a database or a database table. So that's how rules all work. With these rules, they must be applied somewhere in the class hierarchy. They must be applied somewhere in the class hierarchy. So if you're looking to find where a rule is located, then typically the best place to do is to go to that rule and look at the class. Now, the class is, for PEGA technology, a grouping of rule instances. So on the test, that is a definition that you need to understand. It is a grouping of rule instances. And so I would then go to, where's my when rule? My when rule that's here. And I would look at the CL, which indicates the class. And that is the class that this rule is applied to. So that's its scope. That's where it is within the hierarchy. So if you want to see where this class is located in which layer, we have 4 layers. Remember, org, division, the application layer, which is implementation or framework, and our framework. There are 2 separate layers. And then you have the PEGA layer. So where exactly is this class, which is the implementation of a case type? Where is it in the scoping the scope of that particular class will indicate the scope that the rule has. I would go to the App Explorer for my application, and I can see that here's my class, my parent class. Here is the child class of this work class. Or what I could do, I could right click and I could say, look at the inheritance table. Okay. And in my inheritance table will tell me the location of that particular class and gives me an idea of the scope of that rule. So it shows me that it is in the work class, it's at the service request layer, and it's at the very bottom. It's at the very bottom of the hierarchy. Even though it shows that it's at the very top, you have to look at it in reverse, because where's the parent? The parent class is here. That's the top level. And the top level then goes here, and then it goes to the work class, and then it goes to the service request class. And then we have what we call, now that's our pattern inheritance. Notice that the very top level, the org level, only has my town. When I add to my town dash, my town 311, that takes me to the application layer. Application layer, remember, if it's a framework, it's a framework. If it's implementation, it's implementation. If it's both of them, application layer can contain both. And then in the application layer, I have another class, but it is a child because it is the work class. And then under the work class, I have more children. And under that work class, I have service request. So I can go and see the scoping capabilities. It's at the very bottom of the hierarchy, even though it shows it at the very top here, because what they're showing here is the search order. If a rule, if it's looking for a rule and I'm running my case type, which is the service request class, then it's going to start in that class first. If I don't find the rule, then it's going to go up to the parent, and it does that by removing the ending suffix where you see the dash, and then the remaining prefix is the name of the pattern parent. So it's work. So if I don't find the rule here, then it continues to look for it. I remove dash work, which is the ending suffix. The remaining prefix is the pattern parent. Now, I want you to remember this. This is your first introduction to this, but we have a rules resolution process that looks at pattern inheritance. And that's how it looks for a rule when it's trying to find it. If it doesn't find the rule here, then you remove the ending suffix. The remaining prefix is the pattern parent, and it takes you all the way up to the org layer, to the parent class. Now, it does all of that searching. If it finds rules with a given name, it just collects all of them, puts them in a bag, or puts them in cache. And then it does what's called, just a second, I just had an outage. Coming back. There we go. There we go. Then it does something called directed inheritance. Directed inheritance is now it is going to look to see if it's in work cover, if it's in work, or all the way down to the base class. So let me pause right quick. Let me make sure that you guys can see me. Can you still see the share? I don't know if the share is still there. Give me just a second. Let me reset everything. I think we lost the share. Let me share it with you. All right, now I think the share is back. Let's see. Everything got moved around. I had and let me make sure that the recording is still going. Yes. All right, so we're back in business. So as I was talking about, this is how you go and look at the inheritance, and that gives us, of course, the scoping that we are looking at. All right, so let's go back to this. And we have the ability to check a rule in and check out. What I want to do is I want to expand this a bit. I want you to see over here where we do a check in, check out. You see that right to the right of an action. Now, there has to be a feature enabled right now. If I showed you the environment, you don't even have the capability to check in and out. Your access group has to set one of the rules to make sure that that's enabled. But you have the ability to check out a rule. When you check out that rule will come to your personal rule set stack. Now I can show you a personal rule set stack as I go to my operator ID, and I'll go up to my profile, and my profile will bring me a list of rule sets that are in the layer cake that's been created for me. This author at my town, that is my personal rule set. So if I check a rule out, remember I'm working in a team environment. If I check a rule out, a copy goes into my personal rule set. And since that personal rule set sits on top of all of the other rule sets, in the search order, if it's looking for a rule, it will search my personal rule set first for a rule that is checked out of the repository. So if I'm doing unit testing, my own individual testing, that means I can take a rule, check it out, I can modify it, and it won't affect what the rest of my team sees. They still see the original copy that's in the rule sets, or where it may be found in the rule sets. And remember I said, what's inside of a rule set? Classes. And what the purpose of a class? They group rule instances. So inside of a rule set are classes in the group rule instances, and it's in that rule set. So when I want to deploy it from my test environment to my training environment to my pre-production environment to my production environment, I have a way of moving my rules. All right, so if I can check it out, I also can check it out into a branch, and we'll talk about branching later on, but that's when you have your team, maybe the back end team that's dealing with databases, or the UI team, they're working on something, and they have a branch that they're working on, and you only want it to go to that branch to all the people, not to just one person, but to all the people to get access to that branch. So that is another way that I can utilize a rule. Okay, I'm gonna move it over a little bit more, and I'm going to expand it again. All right. Something else I can do now in PEGA, when we're working and I'm working in a environment, typically when we're doing a sprint, remember we use the PEGA Express delivery, and it has iterations. I'm running a sprint, or I'm implementing a sprint. Usually 2-week sprints happen. And after that 2 weeks, they'll lock the rule set because they've tested everything and say, okay, this is locked, this is good to go. We'll move it on to another environment for maybe further testing. Well, as a developer, you have that rule set locked. They unlock a new instance. You were working on a 10101, it's locked. Now they've created a 10102 and they've unlocked it. So all of your new work is done in the new open rule set. But now all of the rules that you worked on are in the 10101. So you have both of those rule sets, and right now your new one is empty. And then all of a sudden you start adding features and you realize, that old rule in 10101 not really working the way I thought it should work, but it's already locked. So I got an issue. So I can check it out, even though it's a locked in a locked rule set, I can check it out and it becomes a private edit. And that private edit, it goes into your personal rule set. Now you can't check it back in, but you can check it out, because what you may want to do is you realize that that particular rule was not written properly. So you checked it out and now you can check it back into your new rule set and it's going to override the rule in the old rule set. So that's some of the concept of overriding, overloading, and object-oriented concepts. But now we're dealing with rule sets and not just with classes. So this is your first introduction. If that's a little confusing to you, don't worry about it. It won't be the last time I talk about this concept. These are the types of technical issues or information that they discuss in this particular exam and the level of skill that you need to know. So I have two rule sets, just to summarize. I created everything in a 10101. I have classes and rule instances in there. I then, in my sprint, I lock that rule set, and then I open a new rule set, or 10102. I start adding new rules here, realizing that, oh, with the new rules, one of the old locked rules was not written correctly. So I can do a private edit to open the rule. I can't save it back into the locked rule set, but I can save it in the new rule set. And now this new rule set will override. This is when you have two copies of the same rule, but they're in different rule sets. Then the newest rule set with that rule will override the old rule. So that's a concept that we'll talk about our rules resolution. And there are 7 availabilities that you look at when you look at a rule. 7 availabilities that you look at when you look at a rule, and they are here. It can be available. It can be not available, which means that it won't participate in that rules resolution. But if both are available, then the latest rule, the most current rule, will always rule out. The 10102 will override the rule in 10101 if both are available. But if it's not available, if a 10102 for some reason in your testing you want to make it unavailable, then it can only find the rule in 10101. Wow. And then we have some others that are blocked, final, and withdrawn. I won't talk about those yet. Those are more advanced and complex, but I'll give you scenarios when you would want to use blocked or final or withdrawn. But for now, just know it's either available or unavailable. And all rules are available when they are created. The rule instances are always available when they're created. You have to manually go and make them unavailable. This is all about rules. This is new information, in-depth information about a rule. And then if I want to check a rule back in, then I check it back in. It goes back to the place where it was checked out. Gets checked back into that rule. Or you can manually tell it to go and check it back in into a different place. So that private edit is where you would check it out of a locked rule, but you check it back into a newer rule set, and you would check the rule into there. All right, so I also want to talk about, I like this graph. This is a really good picture that shows you everything you need to know about the PEGA environment and how rules work and how they are implemented. Now I keep having problems here. I don't know why we got electrical problems, but it keeps dying on me. Hold on just a second. Let's see. Do you guys can still see the share? I think the share is still on. We're getting electrical surges. Okay, so everything is working. Everything is working. Everything's working. Okay, so let's take a look at a broad picture of PEGA. What you're seeing here is everything begins with a rule. PEGA technology, if it's not a rule, it doesn't know about it. A rule must exist for it to have any level of communication with its internal artifacts or its external artifacts. So I have over 200, a little bit more than 200 rule types that I can create, and I can create rule instances off of to create UIs, to create connections to databases, to do calculations, to send emails. I have all types of rules to make that happen. Now, a rule, when it is created, or rule type, when I identify a rule type to create a rule instance, this is showing you that it has to be grouped in a class. Now I can tell you, any rule that you create in App Studio will be in the case type class. You have no way to save it in any other context. In the App Explorer, whenever you create a rule, that rule will always be stored in the case type class. Always, always. But all rules are stored in some type of class in PEGA. All rules that are executable rules. Now, we have different types of rules. You'll learn this. We have administrative rules. They're not stored in classes. They're not stored in classes. They are used differently. But when you are writing an application and you are utilizing the rule types that require execution, they all are associated with a class, with few noted exceptions, like a data page. A data page is owned by the system because it has an inherent capability to listen to changes and to react to those changes. But for the most part, you're safe to say that all rules, the majority of rules, will have to be applied to a class. And that's where you see it can be a data dash class where I apply that rule. I can put a when rule in a data dash class. I can put a when rule in a work dash class. I can put that when rule that we created in a integration dash class. And then what's really interesting, the class itself is a rule type. Now that may be a bit confusing. People ask the question, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, is a class a rule or is a rule a class? Which one came first? Well, we can answer that. Let's take a look here. These are my 16 categories. In my 16 categories, if I'm going to look at, let's see, maybe it's in, I think it's still in system admin. Yeah. Remember I told you these are my rule types. Class is a rule type. So I can have instances of a class, and they can be data dash classes. They can be work dash classes. They can be integration dash classes. Those are the three main classes. Now, as you learn more about PEGA, there are other types of classes that you may utilize, but that's outside the scope of this particular class. So that's where you see the data dash, rule dash, integration dash, work dash. So all rule types can create rule instances associated with classes that are data dash, int dash, or work dash. And then these classes, any or all of these classes must be stored in a rule set. And we have a variety of rule sets. The class is created for a case type, like for a work type class, can only be stored in the implementation and framework class rule sets. In the implementation and framework rule set. So let me say that again for clarity. Classes that are of work dash, these are your case types, can only be stored in the implementation layer or the framework layer and the rule sets associated with it. So this is the application layer. And you have rule sets that are associated. You have 2 rule sets per layer. Okay. Now, in the implementation layer, in the framework layer, inside of its rule set, you can also store data dash classes and integration dash classes in this layer. So, in summary, data dash, int dash, work dash, all 3 types of classes that will have rule instances associated with them are stored and can be stored in the implementation and framework layer. We call that the application layer. The division layer, which will also have 2 rule sets associated with it to store the classes in rule instances, it can contain data dash and integration dash classes that it will store in its rule set. You cannot put a work dash class in a division rule set. The organization layer, the org layer, will have 2 rule sets where you can store classes in rule instances. It can also store data dash and integration dash in the org layer and in its rule sets. It cannot store work dash. So how do we summarize all of this? Work dash is only stored in implementation and framework rule sets or in those layers. Data dash, integration dash can be stored in all of the layers and in all of the rule sets. And then, of course, we have the PEGA rules. That is where we get our directed inheritance. So if you see these solid lines here, you may get these on your test. They indicate directed inheritance. This is directed inheritance. So the way the rules resolution will work, the dotted ones indicate pattern inheritance. So remember I told you when it's looking for a rule, and that when rule was here in that implementation layer that we created in the service request, then it will look here because that's the context. This case type is executing. This work class is implemented in this rule set, one of these rule sets, and it's executing here. And it's going to search in the implementation layer first. Then it's going to go up and search in the division layer. And then it's going to go up and search in the organization layer. And if you have a framework, then it'll come back down here and it'll search in the framework layer. And then it comes back and then it says, now let me go and check with the directed inheritance to see if that rule is in the PEGA rules layer. And that is the search order. It's very important that you learn that search order. It goes pattern inheritance, and then it goes directed inheritance. And it will always do both when it's searching for a rule. It will always do both when it's searching for a rule. So a rule type, I can create rule instances that are applied to classes or grouped in classes of data dash, int dash, work dash, and these classes are stored in the org layer rule sets or the divisional layer rule sets or the implementation rule sets or the framework rule sets. And the out of the box features rules are stored in the PEGA rule set. So what happens when I run an application? Well, let's start over to the right here. Remember that export import package? I had to take all of those rule sets and I had to package them, export them into, let's say, the training environment, pre-production environment. So I can get some users to come in, test it out, make sure that it performs well and that it works well. So we take that, we import the package, it's now imported. Now our security model says what? You have to have an operator ID. That operator ID has what? An access group. That access group has what? An application ID. Now, by the way, all of these are rules. Okay. All of these are rules, but they're not executable rules. That's why I was telling you about the rule dash. They are, though they have data as part of the token that's within the name, they are part of the system. So let me just quickly show you that. If I go to, let's see, technical, no, not there. Yeah, I go to organization. You see, there is a operator ID. An operator, that's a rule type. So an operator ID is a rule, but it's not one of those rules that have to be applied to a class and all of that. It's more functional for the system. Okay? If I open one of them, you'll actually see that there is no class associated with it. Let's give it an opportunity to open here. Okay, so you only see the ID, but you see there has to be a rule set. Every rule has to be stored in a rule set so I can deploy it. I have to take those user operator IDs and move them from training to pre-production to production. So it has to be associated with a rule set. But this is one that's that rule dash that's really not associated with a class. So I wanted you to be aware of that. So here, my operator ID, my access group, my application rule. Now that application rule loads all of these rule sets for me. And my operator ID and access group tells me which one of those case types, the work classes I can execute. I execute this work type, and guess what? It gets stored in memory. It's executing in memory. We have a tool called the clipboard that will allow us to look at that object, that case type, that work case type in memory, and it is located in memory at a data object called PY work page. And within the PY work page, I have all of my fields and properties there, but they reference my data dash object, so they are in memory also. So from data dash and from work dash, I have all of that information now in memory. And PEGA maintains it as it goes from one stage processing step to the next. And information is being stored and saved into the database automatically for you. And it's saved in a PZPV stream. Now you need to learn that name. I'm introducing you to some new concepts, but that work object and its data is stored in PZPV stream. That's called a blob. In database terms, it is a binary large object, PZPV stream. Okay. It also has what's called a PZ-INT key. Remember I told you about primary keys and how those are important? Well, here we have what we would call a primary key, PZ-INT key. It's a unique key so that the system can identify any case type that's been stored into a database as a database record or a database row. So hopefully that gives you an understanding of just all of the uses of a rule. It starts here, the rule type becomes a rule instance, stored, applied to a class. I have 3 different types of classes. Those classes can be scoped at the org level, division level, implementation, or framework level, stored into those rule sets, and they can be deployed. When I execute them, so I want to run a case type, it's going to load my application ID with the rule sets and the classes. It will persist it in memory for me and store it into a database in PZPV stream. That is the working of a PEGA application with rules. All right, so let me get this back to its regular size here. We shall continue on. So hopefully that was very interesting to you. That's very technical, very, very interesting. But now let's talk about classes. Let's talk about classes. Classes is a container for grouping rule instances. So let's take the word container out because I don't want to confuse you. When I talk about a rule set, I want to use the word container for deployment. That's always the definition on the test. It's a container for deployment. Here we say a class is for the grouping of rule instances. For the grouping of rule instances. So we have this applies to. If you're familiar with object-oriented terms, traditional object-oriented terms, it's more of a has-a relationship. For instance, a car or automobile has an engine, right? It's a complex object inside of an object. So in classes, the class being an object, the rule instances being objects to those objects, complex objects, a when rule, a data transform rule, all of those are within that class, that work class. We don't say has a in PEGA, we say apply to. And you'll find that if I go back to my when rule that I created earlier, you'll see that it applies to the class. Now, where do you actually see that though? If I go to, let's go back to decision, since we're dealing with the when rule, simple rule, let's go ahead and create another one. Kind of weird when it won't, there we go. Let me create another one. Now you see, here's the apply to, that's where we get that term from. So when I enter in the name, I have to specify the class that I want it to apply to. So it's the apply to class that I'm making reference to associate the scope of that rule instance to a given class. Remember, class is a grouping of rule instances, and you see the rule set. over to the right. We have this concept of parent and child classes. And we've talked about that, where in the app Explore, we can see this My Town work is the parent of service request. Now, if you want to see the entire long name of service request, just go to sysadmin and you'll see the actual long name. It's mytown 311 work. That would be the parent, and then service request. This is the child. And remember, I just told you about the rules resolution. How do I go up the pattern inheritance? I remove the ending suffix. The remaining prefix is my pattern parent. All right, so that's where we see this directed specifies the parent class for inheritance explicitly. Pattern is using the naming structure. I just explained to you the pattern naming structure. And when I come to any class and I can right click on that class and I can see the inheritance, it shows you whether it's pattern, directed, or both. The bottom three are always directed. And here I start with my org, and then all three of these classes are in the implementation layer in my rule set. If I want to see where that is actually defined, that I have a direct, come on. I can go to my definition for this class. Remember, this is a work dash class or data dash class or int dash class. This happens to be a work dash class. Here we go. And you'll see, we'll talk about this later on. This is a lot of detail, but I just want you to focus here for right now. Right now, I want you to know that this class, find by name first, that's pattern inheritance. That is pattern inheritance. And then you have a directed parent. Always, always, always. So this is always set this way by default. You have to have a use case or reason to uncheck this. It always will do pattern inheritance followed by directed inheritance. Okay. All right. So let's go back here. And you'll see that I've already talked about this enterprise class structure. You saw ECS, ECS, ECS. That's the enterprise class structure. And now you know, again, you got these layers: organization for classes and rule instances that you want to share across the org, division or unit. You want to specialize it across a unit. The application layer is the what we call the implementation layer, and the framework layer, if there is one, if I want to extend it, and then you have the base, which is PEGA. There's the work class, integration class, and a data dash class. All right. So I've covered a lot of information. So let's just pause for right now before I get into rule sets, because that's a whole different arena. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll pick it up. So I'm going to pause here, put a timer up for 10 minutes, and then welcome back from the break. And we were talking about classes. We had just finished up classes. So let's move on. And remember, you can always see the class implementation over in the App Explorer. See this little icon up here? You guys should be familiar with that. Let me float it a little bit, bring it up. If you want to see the scope of a class, in other words, where it is located in its hierarchy, then you can go to the App Explorer And you can see the little leaves indicate that it is a class. If it is indented under a leaf, it is a child of that class. So we have the terms parent and child. Now, any class will then, in this case, this is a work class. This work class has under it a case type called IT ticket, right? IT ticket has some processes, some user interfaces, a data model, and then under IT ticket, there is a child class called laptop request. So that's the way you read that. Notice it's indented under IT ticket. So this is a child of IT ticket. IT ticket is a child of work. Now, in this given class, you see that I could have data, and then data, I can have an employee class that it's not part of the work. Remember this, all of this is under the work. This is now under data. So I have a data dash employee, which has a data model, some decisioning, and some system administration rule instances. Remember, these are rule types. I expand it, I can get to the rule instances. And then I have my integration. So the question is, where do I go to see my rules and their association with the classes for an application? I go to the App Explorer in Dev Studio, and you see something like this. So what I just explained is in the Studio, App Explorer, and that's exactly what you're seeing here. Now, I can see everything here. I can come all the way. Now watch this. If I take that off, now you see all of this. Wow. So I'm taking some of the levels off. If I take this, takes me all the way up to the parent. Now I can see all of the classes that are created. I have a My Town. I have a My Town dash data that's part of the organizational layer. I have a My Town dash FW for the framework. I have a My Town dash int. All of these are part of the organizational layer in it and stored in their rule sets, right? And then I have a My Town dash My Town 311, 311 data, 311 int, 311 link, 311 UI page. Remember I said there are other class types that are out there. We don't really talk about link and UI pages. And then you get the work and you get the work service. And typically the only thing that you only see is the work and the case type here. Okay. So that's where you look at a class. So that covers all of that information. Let's go out. And let's take a look at a rule set. So rule sets, they are for deployment. That is the term, is a deployment container for a group of rules or classes and rule instances. Either way you want to put it, because you know that rules are inside of a class, so we have to deploy those. But we say a rule set is for deployment, a container for deployment. It's going to identify and store and manage all of those rules based upon the naming convention that you give it, a 10101, a 10102, major, what is it, version, major, minor, all of that's important. Rule set stack is a list of rules and rule sets that make up your application that are built on PEGA and any other application. And that rule set stack is dynamically created when you log on. Remember when I logged in? I logged into PEGA with my operator ID, and my operator ID access group, and application rules. All of those are rules, but it ends up loading all of these rule sets. So this is called my rule set stack. This is my dynamic rule set stack. And it gets loaded because my operator ID has an associated access group, which points to an application rule. And that application rule shows me all of those rule sets that are part of the application. That's where we are here, right? That application ID. So let me show you that application ID so you can see and understand that it just identifies all of the rule sets. I'll go to the operator. That's a little bit easier to see. If we're doing that, let's close some of these. I'm going to close this, close this. All right. So this is going to get me to my operator ID called author. My operator ID, remember, has an access group. I have my roles, which indicate my my access and my privileges, but it points to an application rule, a 10101. Now, watch what's inside of the application rule. It's just a list of rule sets. So when I log in through my operator ID, my access tells me what I can do, but my application rule will load those resources for me. So here are my rule sets. It's just a set of rules, rule sets. Here's my rule sets. So it's going to load all of these. It's built on this constellation in the CE base. So it's going to load all of these. So all of that is defined in your application rule. It's a synthesis of the rule sets needed to run your application. And this is what gets exported. We export the application rule. So now let me show you where the application rules are found. Remember, everything's a rule in PEGA. So I go to the application definition, and here's my application rules. And there are all of the application rules that are out there. And let's see if we can find the one that's called My Town. So here's the My Town town application rule. I click on it, it's going to take me right here. I said before, and it holds true. Everything in PEGA is a rule. All right, so we have a rule set stack in the versions, major, minor, patch is the way that we look at it, major, minor, patch. And then we have what's called skimming. Now that's an advanced technique, but I'm going to introduce you to it. Skimming is saving the highest version of a rule into a higher rule set of version. I'll give you a small example, but when we get into actual rule sets and the importance that they play in that portion that's on the certification, I'll talk more in depth. Here's an example of skimming. Remember my example, I said I have a 10101, I have these rules in it. I have 3 rules in it. Let's keep it simple. A, B, and C. Okay. I come out and I lock it. I come out with rule set 10102. And I have A and B in it. Okay. Now remember, this a 101 has A, B, and C. A, B, and C. And this has a 10102 has A and B. So if I do skimming to create a 10103, or no, the way they would do it to create a 10201, okay? So my third rule set is a 10201. Now follow me. I got a 10101 with A, B, C. I have a 10102 with A and B, versions of A and B. I want to create a 10201. I want to find the latest version. So it's going to take A from a 10102, B from a 10102, and it's going to take C from a 10101, and merge it, all three of those into a 1 or 2 or 1. So I hope you got that. If not, just go back and listen to it. It'll make sense. Listen to the podcast. That will be something that it will definitely explain. But skimming is a way to start for the sake of production. Sometimes you get too many rule sets. If you look at that rule set stack, it was quite a few, right? And if you want to say, okay, enough is enough, I just need to skim it all into one big rule set, then you would do something like that. But you do that for efficiency, and that's something that someone like Ufuk would look at from an LSA perspective for performance. Right. The enterprise class structure is composed of the rule sets. Those layers, those are the rule sets, and we call that the ECS, enterprise class structure. But you have two rule sets by default for each one of the layers. You saw that, right? You saw that each one of these had R1, R2, R1, R2, R1, R2, right? So org layer, R1, R2. Division, R1, R2. Implementation, R1, R2. Framework, R1, R2. Okay, so the way they do that and why they do that is in one rule set, let's just say R1, that's where all of the rules go, with the exception of the rules that are stored in classes that are integration classes, INT. R2 is for integration rules. So you have each one of the layers will have two rule sets. We'll say R2 is for integration classes that have rules applied to it in every one of these. R1 is much bigger because it has all the other rules in it. So that is the way the structure is created and set up in PEGA. Now we have something that's called a production rule set. This is a little odd that they call it a production rule set. But the production rule set is the only rule set that can be unlocked in production. Part of my explanation earlier said that when I go through a sprint, after 2 weeks, we lock and roll. And at some point, everything gets locked, sent over, we're through with the application. But there's a situation or a case, use case, where I want a rule set unlocked. And that is when we use the word delegate. There are certain rules that I want to delegate to the business community, to actually the user community. Now that sounds strange and odd because you would never give a user your Java code to modify. But remember, we're talking about rules here. So in PEGA, we can give them a decision table. Looks like a spreadsheet. Users can even use that. A good use case would be at a bank. You have a local bank. And maybe a local bank has the autonomy or the capability to set their own interest rate. So everyone uses the same application, the PEG application, but we create a interest rate decision table, and we let each branch determine what percentage that they want to put for CDs or money market certificates. So we call that a production rule set. It is unlocked. It's an unlocked rule set in production. All other rule sets are locked and must be locked. And since it's unlocked, that means that that user, maybe the branch manager of that bank, would have in its access group that rule set attached to its rule set stack with the proper authorization that he or she can go in and modify the decision table. And then we have another type of rule set called branching, and it's when I want to do parallel software development. I have the trunk of development, to where everyone is working off of those rules. And then I create a branch that in essence says the UI team is working on a major portion, another branch that says my back end connectivity group is working on that. And it doesn't affect if I have to do training in the middle here, but when they get through with their major sections, they will import or they will merge their branches back in. It's a bigger exercise than just checking out a rule, checking in a rule. This is a massive checking in of the branch of rules into the major repository. So it takes a lot of coordination for that to happen. So you should see, let's see, here's an example. See if we can find I could add a branch here. Here's for branch development. So I could add a branch here that's part of my rule. And I believe if I go to advanced, I can see the production rule. Let me move it up, or let me make this smaller, one of the two. Yes, and then this is where I see my production rule set. And where are these found? On the application rule. Well, that makes sense. The application rule contains all the rule sets for any given application. And what's in rule sets? All the classes and rule instances that's associated with their scoping within the divisions, or not division, or within the layers that they are in. All right. Whoa, where did it go? Come back. There we go. Went too far. All right, let me decrease that. All right, now these are two cases that we'll talk about that will require more conversation. We have something called relevant rules. So these are the rules that have been marked for contextual reusability. So in other words, the best way I can show that to you, I can go to my case, service request. If a rule has been marked relevant, and most rules are marked relevant, that when I come to this stage, and if I can hit my down arrow and rules show up, that means that they are relevant rules. They have been marked rule, which means when I go into a studio in the contextual environment, it appears for me to select. I can actually create rules that don't show up in that list, and they are considered not relevant. And the word relevant in this case is simply indicates, is it visible for selection or not? So just know that's a concept that we have in PEGA. Some rules are made relevant, some rules are not. And they even show you manually if a rule is not relevant. Let's go back to app explore in my decision. Let's open that rule back up, go to action, and I can mark it as relevant if it's not already relevant. This one is though. So I can create rules that I don't want to be relevant. I don't want it to show up in a drop down if I like. So that's a concept that works, deals with the rule. And then we have circumstancing. Man, circumstancing is an advanced form of overloading, overriding. I want to make sure you understand what those concepts are first. Traditional object-oriented programming says if I have a parent and that parent has a child and both of them have a behavior with the exact same name, okay? If my parent is an automobile and it says brake, like I want to mash the brake, and then I then have a child that says it is a Mercedes. Automobile is a parent, more general. Mercedes is a more specialized, it's a child. And it has brake as a method. then the break method or behavior overrides the parent behavior. Okay. And so that is a concept within object-oriented programming that I can override something. Right. Now, I also have this concept, this traditional concept within object-oriented programming, where if I'm in the same class and I have a method or behavior with two names, but the parameters that I pass in have to differ. That's called overloading. Okay. I have in the same class, I have two methods or behaviors with the same name, but we call it a different signature. That's called overloading. The other one, parent-child, methods have the same name, same signature. It's called overriding. I don't know if I said that earlier correctly, but parent-child relationship, same values, overriding. Overloading in the same class, methods with the same name, different signature, or parameters being passed in, overloaded. So that's what we call polymorphic behavior. That's a Greek term. Poly means many, morphic forms, many forms of the same name. We call it circumstancing in PEGA. And we say it's a variant rule. We have a base rule that says under normal circumstances, this rule will execute, but I can create a rule that says if you pass me additional parameters, then at runtime, it will determine if I use the base rule or the variant rule. In object-oriented terms, it will say we make a decision at runtime which one of the overloaded methods we will select. But here we call it a base rule and a variant rule. And we'll talk more about this. This is definitely an advanced concept, but it deals with rules that you will use and create to solve complex solutions. We can have a and do circumstancing on a property. If a given property for your American Express card hold owner, if that property is gold, then I want you to call this object. If it is silver, I want you to call this other object with all of its benefits, right? So that's how that works. So property or date, multivariant if I want multiple rules that I have to evaluate. So there's a way that we can do that. And how do we create a variant rule? Not all rules can be circumstance, but if I can create a rule off of it, you'll see that I can specialize by class or rule set, or I can specialize by a given circumstance. So in PEGA, it exceeds traditional concepts because we have what's called a rule set. Let's say that I have 010101 and 010102, and I have two rules with the same name in both of those rule sets. Okay, well, that's probably considered, we call it circumstancing because it's not really overloading or overriding. They're probably in the same class, but they're in different rule sets. Okay, but I could have in one rule set, I could have a rule, a base rule, and a variant rule, and then that's still considered circumstancing. Could be in the same rule sets, in the same class, or it could be in separate rule sets. It could be in different classes with the same name. So there are various ways to do that. It is an advanced concept, but I wanted to introduce you to it. We'll learn more about it later on. And then rules resolution, and this will be the last topic. I think we are approaching the end of, yeah. So rules resolution. I think this would be enough and we'll stop I'll pick up with the other lecture that I said I'd talk about on Monday about the app extended. So this is good information to know. Now, rules resolution process. I know it's been a long day, so I will cover it in general. I'll do a review on Monday just to make sure that you understand it. Every one of the rules have to go through rules resolution. It's an algorithm that's been around since the beginning of PEGA. It makes a determination of which rule should be executed for a given situation. So it works by looking at the availability settings. Remember, I mentioned that before. Everything has to be available in order for it to go through rules resolution. So if you create a rule and it's available and it's part of your application and it is implemented in your case flow, at the time of execution, when it gets to that step and it calls that particular rule to execute, it has to determine is it the appropriate rule. What if I have one rule in a 10101 or 10102 in my branch and one that's in my private rule set? Which one do I choose? Rules resolution will solve that problem for me. It goes through context. Where am I operating out of? Which work class am I operating out of? Is the rule found there in that class? If it is, then it puts it in the cache, a copy in the cache. It goes up to the parent. It removes the ending suffix, the remaining prefix. It finds the pattern parent, and it says, hey, if there's a version there, I'm going to put it in the cache. And it goes all the way up to the division layer, the org layer. Okay, hopefully we're back. Make sure the recording is on. Man, we keep getting power outages here. Not sure what's going on. Okay, let's see. I think you guys can hear me. Recording is still on. Okay, the sharing is still here. Okay, so let's talk about what I was talking about, the availability. So I have a version of the rule in a 10101 or 10102 in my rule set stack. It's in a branch rule, and my rule set stack is in my private rule set in the rule set stack. So which one do I choose? It starts by looking into the work class. If it's there, save it. It goes all the way up to the pattern parent, comes back. Do I have a framework? It looks in there. And all right, I don't know what's happening, guys. It keeps happening. Okay, so I'm back. And then it goes to directed inheritance. It goes to PEGA, and it tries to find it. So if it's available, then it's going to find the most current rule. If it's unavailable, it says I won't even look for it. Okay. Final, which says that this rule can be viewed and executed, and it cannot be edited or copied into another rule set. So you'll find that some of those out of the box rules PEGA doesn't want you to change, they are considered final. Okay. And then you have blocked and withdrawn. So blocked is a rule that it may be selected, but if it is selected, it's going to throw an error. Sounds weird, but why would I do that? Here's the use case. I move my application into production. I made it available on the web. People want to withdraw money. So they put in, I want to withdraw with $100, but somehow my rule translated that, since you translated from American dollars to pesos and you get 1,000. Yikes. You don't want that to happen. So A quick way to fix that is to create a copy of that exact same rule that's doing that translation, but set its availability to block. And when it's set to block, have another rule, a UI that pops up that says temporarily unavailable, temporary fix, right? So we set that new rule, put that rule set out there. It finds it first. It's blocked now. That blocked logic calls a UI that says, hey, this is not working right now. We'll let you know when it's available. That's a use for a block. Withdrawal is the ability to skip and look for instances of a rule in the next highest class. So in the United States, and I'm quite sure in Mexico, when you go from one government to the other, they change policies to say this is valid, now it's not valid. And so I could do something now that we have a different president in office. I won't talk about politics, but anyway, the other uh, president worked more with the people, so they had social programs available. So now this new president comes in and says, I don't want any of those programs available. So anytime you're working with the government and it has to do with what's available to the public or not, I want you to withdraw that rule. In other words, create a version on top of it to say, don't look at anything in the past, only look at things that are in this version and use it. And so it's considered not seen, it's hidden, it's withdrawn, and only the current rules will be considered. And it does that by all of this is done through rules resolution. It's 7 steps, 10 steps, I'm sorry, 10 steps. It's going to see, number one, if the rule is already in cache. PEGA caches a lot of the rules for performance sake. If it's not in cache, so when you log into the application the first time, since PEGA is built on PEGA itself, it's going to have to load everything in cache the first time. But after that, it gets faster. So if it's not in cache, then it has to go and find the instance. It looks for the name and the rule type. Is it a decision rule type? Is it, oh, that's actually a category. Is it a when rule type? Then find the rule instance, right? So find all the rule instances as it does pattern inheritance and it does directed inheritance. Then it says, are any of those set to not available? If it is, it gets rid of them, okay? And then the fourth step, it says, all of these rules I selected, let me look and see if they're even in my rule set stack. If they're not, then I'll throw them out. Then it says, hey, some of these rules are in classes that's not even not part of my class hierarchy. Then it throws them out. Now I have only the rules that are in my class hierarchy, that are in my rule set versions, that are something other than not available, and that matches my name. So which one is the correct one? Well, it starts ranking based upon circumstancing. And man, this gets very convoluted when you get ready to take the SSA test, the senior system architect. You got to figure out this ranking. It looks at circumstancing, circumstancing by date, circumstancing by class, circumstancing by rule set, circumstances by version. It gets very complicated at this point. And then it orders them and it sets them into cache. This is the one I do first, second, third, or fourth, right? Then it finds the most appropriate instance and it does a final check and it says, is this set to blocked? If it's not set to block, then it's going to verify that the user is authorized to use the rule, and then it loads it. All of that happens in less than 1 millisecond. Wow. And you'll be surprised. I'll show you later on how many rules get loaded when I run an application. It will amaze you. So that is it. That is all that we are going to cover. We talked only about rules and how they are used, how they're created, how they are scoped, how they are implemented. They are the cornerstone in the building block for PEGA and PEGA applications and the PEGA technology. Thank you for your time. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you Monday morning. Okay, and I think it's time to go because I keep getting these blackouts. So I'll see you Monday morning. Okay, I'll stop the recording.